The air inside the country club felt like money, still cold and heavy. It clung to every word spoken at the tables, wrapping even the cruelest comments in politeness. Malik Thompson walked carefully, his back straight, his hands steady as he carried a silver tray through the maze of white tablecloths and polished glasses. His eyes stayed low, not because he lacked confidence, but because he had learned long ago that in places like this, looking a man in the eye could cost you your job. He was 28, but sometimes he felt much older. Years of swallowing pride and wearing a smile had taught him how to move unnoticed, how to make himself small without ever shrinking. He worked here at night to pay for his finance degree. During the day, he studied systems built to exclude people, like him. And at night, he served those who built them. Helix Tech's annual shareholder dinner was the most important night of the year for the club. Everything had to be perfect. The lighting was dim and golden. Waiters glided like ghosts. The jazz band in the corner played so softly it almost didn't exist. Every seat was filled with men who made decisions that shaped cities, while never seeing the people who cleaned their offices or packed their deliveries. Malik reached table 9, the center of power tonight. Mr. Benson sat at the head, tall, silver-haired, smug, the CEO of Helix Tech, a man who smiled like he already owned. Tomorrow, around him were the company's board members, all white, all wearing suits so expensive they looked stitched from silence itself. As Malik poured water, one of the men leaned back and said, "You know what I love about this place? The staff is so invisible." Another laughed. "Exactly, they know their place. No interruptions, no attitude, just service." Malik didn't flinch. He'd heard worse. But the words still landed like stones in his chest. Mr. Benson smirked but said nothing. Then he spoke, voice low and certain. "We need to drop that vendor in East Lake." "Walker Distribution?" one of the men asked. Benson nodded. "We kept them during the diversity craze, but now? It's a waste. We're not a charity. They're too expensive. We can replace them next quarter." "They're black-owned, right?" another asked. "Nice for the optics back then, but we've moved on." Malik's hand paused mid-pour. He willed it not to shake. Walker Distribution was his uncle's company. His uncle Marcus had built it from scratch, from one delivery truck and a borrowed warehouse. Malik had helped there as a teen, carrying boxes, learning inventory, watching. Deals happen over coffee and respect. His uncle had taught him that dignity was non-negotiable. Now the men at the table laughed. "They'll be fine," one said. "There's always another grant or social program for people like them." Malik turned and walked away. He moved through the hallway until he found a quiet corner near the back. He set the tray down, pressed his palms against the wall, and took a breath that felt like it scratched its way out of his throat. Behind him, a voice spoke gently. "What happened?" It was Evelyn Carter, the head server. She'd worked there for over 20 years, moving through racism like water around. Stones, calm, patient but unstoppable. "They're cutting off my uncle," Malik said quietly. "Just throwing his company away." Evelyn's face didn't change, but her eyes softened. "Of course they are. He built that business, honest, reliable, never once missed a shipment. None of that matters to them," she replied. "They don't see value. They see cost." I wanted to say something. "You think they'd listen?" "No, but at least they'd know I was there." She put a hand on his arm. "They already know. They just don't care. That's the part that hurts the most." He nodded, swallowing the burn in his chest. Later, after the event ended, Malik sat alone in the locker room. He stared at his phone. A message from his uncle read, "Proud of you, nephew. Keep grinding. You're going to change things." Malik stared at the screen, fingers trembling. Maybe he couldn't save the contract. Maybe he couldn't change those men's minds. But he could do something else. He opened the Helix Tech dashboard. He still had access from his internship. He looked at the numbers, the contracts, the names. Then he started to write. The next morning, Malik arrived early at campus and met with Professor Hall, a former corporate law advisor now teaching finance, ethics. She listened as he explained what he'd overheard and what he had found in the company's back-end system. She asked careful questions, her eyes narrowing as he described the upcoming termination of Walker Distribution. "You understand what you're doing?" she asked. "This could affect your internship, maybe even your degree." "I know," he replied, "but this affects people's lives, my family's lives. I can't watch them get erased." She studied him for a long moment. "Then we do this the right way. Bring facts, bring truth, and never raise your voice." They spent the next 3 days combing through financials, legal obligations, contracts, everything Helix Tech was supposed to disclose before terminating a supplier. What they found wasn't just morally wrong, it was legally questionable. No notice period, no audit justification, just a quiet removal of a small black-owned business to make way for a cheaper overseas alternative. By Friday, they had compiled the evidence into a detailed report. Malik was exhausted, but he'd never felt so focused. For once, he wasn't just watching injustice happen. He was confronting it. That evening, Malik returned to the country club for his usual shift. The board was back again, this time for a smaller executive dinner. He walked through the doors with his head held a little higher. They didn't notice. They never did. At the end of the night, Mr. Benson handed him the company card to settle, the private rooms tab. Malik took it without a word, walked to the front desk, and instead of swiping it immediately, he took out a flash drive and copied the public-facing report onto the payment system's records. It was a digital fingerprint, impossible to ignore. Within hours, the file made its way to Helix Tech's shareholder portal, thanks to a professor who knew exactly where to press. The next morning, the company's internal ethics board received an anonymous tip. The day after that, Walker Distribution's contract was no longer being removed. It was being reviewed, publicly. By Monday, Malik was called into a meeting with his internship supervisor. But instead of being fired, he was offered a full-time role post-graduation. "Someone up the chain wants to meet you," the man said. "Apparently you've got sharp eyes." Malik didn't smile, but he nodded. "I've been watching a long time." That night, Malik told his uncle what had happened. Marcus was quiet at first, then he said, "You did what I couldn't, son. You made them look." "They'll look again," Malik replied. "I'm just getting started." A week later, as the sun set behind the city skyline, Malik walked past the country club one last time. Inside, the same old power games were being played, but something had changed. A voice had spoken out, not with anger, but with truth, and this time it had been heard. The silence in that room had been broken, and it wouldn't be the last time. A few days later, Evelyn found Malik sitting outside the club before his shift. She handed him a paper cup of coffee and sat beside him without a word. The silence between them wasn't heavy, it was full. "Heard what happened," she said after a moment. "Benson's sweating. Word is the board's getting heat from investors." Malik gave a quiet nod. They didn't think anyone in that room mattered. They never do. But now they'll... "Remember," she sipped her coffee, "you know, I've seen a lot of young men walk through these doors with fire in their hearts, most burn out. You turned the flame into light. I just couldn't stay silent." "No," she said, "you chose not to. That's what makes you dangerous in the best way." He looked at her, really looked. For the first time, he saw not just a server, but a soldier, a woman who had spent her life holding doors open and holding ground at the same time. "I'm applying to a policy fellowship," he said. "Finance ethics, regulation, something real." Evelyn smiled. "Told you, you're not just a waiter." As the evening bell rang and the staff filed back inside, Malik stood a little taller. He walked through the dining room not as someone invisible, but as someone undeniable. They hadn't given him a seat at the table, so he built his own. He didn't need applause. He didn't need headlines. What he needed was already his dignity, his truth, and the knowledge that he had finally, fully been seen. That was enough. He walked on. The sound of ice dropping into glasses echoed, louder than it should have. Malik carried the tray with practiced ease, weaving past tables where conversations flowed in low, confident voices. The atmosphere at the Helix Tech dinner had changed. The air was thicker now, Something about it more careless, more arrogant than the previous night. Power was louder when it thought it had already won. Malik approached table 9, where the board members had gathered again. Their post-dinner drinks sparkled in the dim lighting. Mr. Benson was at the center of the table, speaking with the calm detachment of someone who was used to being listened to, no matter what came out of his mouth. As Malik leaned in to sit down, Benson glanced at him briefly and said, "You know what I like about good waiters? They know when to speak, which is never." A few of the executives laughed, sharp, dismissive. "Like shadows with shoes," one added, smirking. Malik stayed still, placing each glass gently on the table, not letting his face betray the heat rising behind his eyes. But as he turned to leave, something small and crumpled flew past his arm and landed at his feet. It was a napkin. "Oops," someone said with mock surprise. "Mind picking that up, Malik? Or is that above your pay grade?" The laughter that followed was louder now. Malik bent to pick it up slowly, not because he had to, but because the weight in the room told him it was expected. As he rose, another voice chimed in, clear and cutting. "Malik. That your real name? Sounds more like a janitor than someone with a future." The room erupted again, a deeper kind of laughter this time, one built not just on cruelty, but confidence that it would never be punished. Malik's hand tightened around the tray. His jaw locked. He stared forward, saying nothing. Around the room, other diners paused. A woman at a nearby table lowered her fork, looking uncomfortable. A young couple on the far side avoided eye contact. Some smirked. Most said nothing. Malik's chest burned. Shame flushed his neck, curling down into his stomach like something poisonous. Every part of him screamed to speak, to react, to throw something, to walk away. But he didn't. He couldn't. He knew how this would be spun. They'd laugh harder. Or worse, they'd say he was aggressive. He turned to walk away, eyes forward, hands trembling. In the corridor, the door swung open behind him. Evelyn was there, already stepping toward him. She had seen the way he moved. Too rigid, too quiet. "They said something," she said. "Not a question." Malik nodded once. "They said a lot." She stepped beside him and placed a hand lightly on his back. "You don't have to hold it in." "I do if I want to keep my job." She was quiet for a moment. "No job's worth your dignity, baby." "I didn't lose my dignity," he said, eyes stinging. "I just buried it long enough to make rent." The words fell from him like bricks he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Evelyn didn't speak right away. She just stayed next to him, grounding him. "You're not alone in this," she said. "Don't ever forget that." Back in the locker room later, Malik sat on the bench, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it had something to offer him. The laughter still rang in his ears, echoes he couldn't scrub out no matter how many times he blinked. His phone buzzed, a message from his classmate in the finance program. "Group project meeting moved to Thursday. You in?" He stared at. Just yesterday, he had explained cash flow management to the same classmates using terms those men in suits probably didn't even understand. But to them, he'd never be more than a pair of hands in a pressed shirt. He typed, "Yeah, I'm in," then paused, deleted it, and wrote again, "Yeah, I'll be there, got some things to say." Malik put the phone down and exhaled. His hands still felt shaky. But the shame was starting to turn, slowly, quietly, into something else, something harder, something steady. Tomorrow they'd laugh again. But someday soon they'd see him differently. Maybe not today, but it was coming. The next day felt heavier. Malik moved through the club like a ghost wrapped in steel. He'd barely slept, replaying every second of the humiliation, trying to decide if silence had been strength or surrender. But every time he imagined speaking up, he saw the outcome. Him, out of work, his uncle's face, tuition unpaid, his mother's voice reminding him, "Pick your battles, son." But never forget, they exist. Still, something had shifted. The silence inside him was no longer empty. It was full of noise, of memory, of resolve. As he restocked the bar area, one of the newer staff approached. Kenny, barely 19, wide-eyed and always moving like he had somewhere better to be. "Hey, Malik. What they said last night, I heard it." Malik looked at him, unsure what to say. Kenny scratched his head. I wouldn't have been able to keep it together. "I don't know how you did." I didn't keep it together," Malik said quietly. "I just kept it quiet." Kenny nodded. "It's messed up. You don't deserve that." Malik offered a faint smile. "No one does, but some of us get it anyway." Later that evening, the same executives returned. Their laughter was just as loud. Mr. Benson passed Malik like he was part of the wall. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a refill of scotch and another joke at someone else's expense. But Malik wasn't watching them anymore. He was watching the room. One woman, seated alone near the fireplace, caught his eye. She had been at the table the night before. She hadn't laughed. Tonight, she watched him closely. When he approached to clear her plate, she spoke. "I saw what happened yesterday." He paused. Waited. "I wanted to say something, but I didn't know if it would help." Malik met her eyes. "You don't have to say anything now. You just have to remember it." She nodded. "I will. Small, but real." After his shift, Malik stayed behind, sweeping the back hallway, even though it wasn't his task. Evelyn appeared again, a quiet guardian of dignity. "They laughed because they thought they could," she said. "That's the thing about power. It makes people forget they bleed." "I don't want revenge," Malik replied. "I just want to matter in a place where they pretend I don't exist." "You already do," she said, "but they'll never tell you that. You have to remind them." "How?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "By becoming something they can't ignore." Malik looked at her. "And what if I fail?" "Then fail loudly," she said, "but never silently." That night, Malik walked home through the cool air, streetlights blinking above. He passed the old church on 6th, the corner store run by his neighbor, the school where his cousin taught math during the day and GED classes at night. These were the places that knew his name, that cared whether he showed up. He remembered something his uncle once told him. "Son, there will always be rooms that weren't built for you, but that don't mean you walk out of them empty-handed." Malik opened the Notes app on his phone and began drafting something. An essay, maybe. A statement. A voice. He wasn't sure yet where it would lead, but this time he was going to speak, and this time they would hear. The following morning, Malik walked into class a little earlier than usual. His professor was setting up slides on financial equity, completely unaware of the storm that had been brewing inside one of her quietest students. Malik sat down, pulled out his notebook, and flipped it open to a fresh page. Not for class notes, but for something else. He began writing a letter, not to the board, not to the club manager, but to himself. A declaration, a reminder. He wrote, "I am not what they see. I am not their jokes, their projections, their silence. I am not their property, their entertainment, or their reflection. I am here because I earned it, and I will not forget myself." The words flowed faster than he expected, each one scrubbing out a piece of shame, leaving something stronger behind. By the time class started, he had filled 3 pages. He tucked them into his bag like armor. That night, back at the club, he worked his shift with the same quiet grace. But something had changed. He wasn't just surviving it anymore. He was studying it, shaping it, preparing. Because every laugh they echoed in his direction had awakened something they couldn't laugh. And Malik? He wasn't just going to remember that night, he was going to make sure they never forgot it. He would rise, with truth, with dignity, and with unstoppable purpose. Unapologetically, Malik sat on the cold bench in the locker room, elbows resting on his knees, palms open and motionless. The overhead lights flickered slightly, buzzing with that familiar fluorescent hum. The walls were lined with scratched-up metal lockers, and the faint smell of bleach lingered in the air, but none of it registered. His mind was somewhere else, trapped in the laughter that had followed him home and echoed in his sleep. He had kept quiet, had walked away, had done what he was supposed to do. And still, it didn't feel like survival. It felt like surrender. For the first time in a long time, Malik questioned everything. His job, his degree, his worth. He was exhausted, not from the shift, from carrying silence like a weight that grew heavier each time he swallowed another insult. The humiliation had replayed in his mind all day. He had gone over every word, every look, every chuckle that came at his expense, and all he could feel was the heat of shame and the sting of being made small again. He closed his eyes and saw himself in high school, top of his class, debate team captain, AP student with a dream of Wall Street. He remembered telling his guidance counselor he wanted to study finance at one of the top schools. The man had smiled tightly and said, "That's ambitious. Have you considered trade school? They pay well." He remembered the way that smile had felt like a no before the conversation even began. And then there was his mother's voice, firm, familiar, echoing from a place deep in his chest. "You'll have to be twice as good just to be seen as equal, Malik. That's the truth. You fight smart, not loud." He had taken that advice and buried it into his bones, worked harder, stayed up later, applied to every program he could find. He never asked for shortcuts, never cut corners, just kept moving, always forward, always polite. But now he wasn't so sure. His father had tried the same thing, showed up on time, stayed late, took pride in his work, still got replaced by a younger, less qualified white man who happened to play golf with the regional manager. Malik was 16 when his father came home that day, tired, angry, quiet. He didn't stay long after that. Too much broken pride. Not enough answers. Malik opened his locker and pulled out a small card tucked behind his lunch container. It was his internship badge, Helix Tech Finance Division. No one at the club knew about it. He had gotten the placement after submitting a project on ethical investment strategies, and out of over 200 applicants, only 3 had been chosen. He had told no one, not even Evelyn. It felt like something fragile, like if he said it out loud, it might disappear. He traced the edge of the card with his thumb. It had his photo on it, his name in clean print. But today, even that didn't feel real. What did it matter when they only saw the tray in his hand and not the mind behind it? He pulled out his phone. Social media lit up the screen. Smiling. Faces in corporate offices. Group shots from Helix Tech's Diversity and Inclusion panel. There, front and center, was Mr. Benson with his hand on the shoulder of a young black intern, grinning for the camera. The caption read, "Celebrating Black Excellence in Leadership. Helix Tech is proud to support tomorrow's innovators." Malik stared at it, unmoving. Black excellence. Was that what last night was? He scrolled further. Another post about a grant Helix Tech had awarded to minority-owned vendors. He wanted to laugh. Walker Distribution had been one of them. Until 2 days ago. Now the man who had been praised for building a business from nothing was being discarded like a line item. He threw the phone onto the bench beside him and leaned forward, gripping his head in his hands. This was the part no one told you about. The gap between your reality and their performance. The space where your pain became their campaign. He sat like that for a long time, long enough for the room to empty, long enough for the noise in his mind to get quiet enough to hear something else. Doubt, fear, anger, all crowded together in his chest, clawing for a decision. He could keep quiet, finish the internship, get the job, move up slowly and silently. Maybe one day he'd be the one giving the orders, or he could speak up, risk it all, tell the truth, demand change. But what if they didn't listen? What if they shut the door on him like they had his father? What if speaking up meant starting over? He took a breath and sat up straight. His phone buzzed beside him, a message from Evelyn. "You didn't deserve what happened. They're wrong about you. Don't let them make you believe them." He stared at the words for a long time. Then, slowly, he picked up the badge and slid it into his wallet, no longer hiding it. The choice wasn't easy, but for the first time, he knew it had to be made. That weekend, Malik avoided the club. He took a shift off and stayed in his apartment, surrounded by textbooks and empty coffee mugs. But none of it could distract him. The questions wouldn't leave. Could one voice really make a difference? Could a single act of truth compete with a wall of power built on silence? He opened his laptop and stared at a blank document. The cursor blinked, patient and waiting. He began to type, not an email, not a post, but a reflection. Something personal, something real. He wrote about what it felt like to be humiliated in public and then expected to smile like nothing happened. He wrote about the weight of generational lessons, about how survival often meant shrinking. He wrote about the badge in his wallet and the company that praised diversity while mocking the dignity of its black employees behind closed doors. And then he stopped. He read it back. For the first time, his pain looked like something with shape, something that could move. It wasn't just in his chest anymore. It was on the screen, outside of him. He copied the text into an anonymous submission, form for an online publication focused on workplace injustice. He hesitated before hitting submit. His finger hovered above the trackpad. What if it got traced back to him? What if it didn't matter? Then he thought of his uncle, of his father, of Evelyn, of Kenny, of the next young black worker who might be told to know his place before he even knows his worth. He clicked submit. And for the first time in days, he breathed a little easier. On Monday morning, the story appeared on the site's front page, behind the curtain, one black intern's story of silence and survival at Helix Tech. It spread quickly. By noon, Helix Tech's PR department was in overdrive. They issued a statement calling the story deeply concerning and promised an internal investigation. Employees began sharing it across platforms. Some anonymously confirmed the culture described, others denied it, but no one ignored it. At the club that evening, whispers replaced laughter. Evelyn pulled Malik aside. "You see what you started?" He shrugged. "They don't know it was me," she smiled. "Maybe not yet, but they will." The board dinner was quieter than usual. Mr. Benson didn't make eye contact. One of the younger executives looked visibly uncomfortable, tapping his fork against his plate without touching his food. Malik served them like always, but now, every step he took felt heavier, not with fear, but with presence. They saw him now, not just the hands, the man. After the shift, Malik stood outside, staring up at the club's grand facade. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Evelyn. "You're not just in the room anymore. You're shaping it." He looked at the building for a moment, longer, then walked home under a sky that finally felt open. The next day, his internship supervisor called him in. "I'm not going to ask if it was you," the man said. "But I will say, people are paying attention now." Malik met his eyes. "Good," the man nodded. "You've got guts. That matters." "I've got reasons," Malik replied. Weeks passed. The article continued to circulate. Discussions began. Policy memos were drafted. Malik received an invitation to join a roundtable on ethical leadership. Anonymous, but he accepted. In the quiet of his apartment one night, Malik opened that original letter he wrote to himself in the locker room. He added a final line at the bottom. "They don't get to define me. I already have." He closed his notebook, placed it on the table, and turned off the lights. Whatever came next, he was ready. That Friday, Malik walked into his finance lecture and noticed something new on the board, an announcement about a university-led conference on equity in corporate America. One of the breakout sessions was titled, "Navigating Systems That Weren't Built for You." He read the names of the panelists and froze at the last one. Monsieur Thompson, student contributor. He hadn't signed up. Before he could process it, Professor Hall entered the room. She smiled when she saw him. "Glad you're here, Malik. I recommended you. Hope you don't mind." "I didn't think I was ready." "You never are," she said. "Until you are." He nodded, unsure whether to thank her or question the timing. But deep down, part of him knew. This was the next step. Not a performance, a truth. Spoken, not hidden. When the day of the conference arrived, Malik stood at the edge of the panel room, adjusting his collar, breathing slowly. Dozens of students, faculty, and community members filled the rows. He took his seat at the table up front, alongside professors and professionals with years more experience. When it was his turn to speak, he hesitated for only a second. Then he told the story, not naming names but naming truth. He talked about what it felt like to be the only one in the room, about having to work twice as hard for half the recognition, about silence and how it protects systems more than people. He talked about his mother, about the things he had carried that no one saw, and then he said what had sat in his chest for weeks. I am not angry because I want to be. I am angry because I had to be quiet for so long. But silence never protected me. It only protected them. The room went still, and then came applause, not the kind given out of politeness, but the kind that said, "We heard you. We see you now." After the session, students approached him. Some shook his hand. Some just said thank you. One young woman whispered, "That gave me the courage to stop pretending." Later that night, back in his apartment, Malik took out his internship badge. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he placed it in a folder marked, "Start here." Not because that's where it had begun, but because that's where he had begun. In the weeks that followed, he received a call from a local publication wanting to feature his story, another from a professor asking him to co-lead a workshop, and one from his uncle. "I read the article," Marcus said. "Made me proud, but not surprised." "Think I did the right thing?" Malik asked. "I think you remembered who you are," Marcus replied. "That's always the right thing." Malik stood by the window. The city stretched before him, not as something to fear, but something to face. He had doubted himself, been made to feel small, but through every insult, every flash of isolation, he had learned something that would stay with him forever. His voice was not a risk. It was his power, and he would never forget that again. The air in the classroom was warmer than usual. Malik sat near the back, his notebook open but untouched, eyes fixed on the words scrolling across the screen at the front of the room. The night class was half full, a quiet group of students, some older, some barely out of high school, all trying to hold on to the idea that hard work still paid off. Professor Denise Hall stood at the podium, her presence calm but commanding. She wore glasses low on her nose, and when she spoke, it was with the cadence of someone who had learned every lesson the hard way and lived to teach others how to survive smarter. After class ended, Malik stayed in his seat as the room emptied. She noticed, "You've been quiet tonight, Mr. Thompson." He gathered his things slowly. "Long week." "Sit," she said, motioning toward the front row. "Talk." He hesitated, then walked down and sat. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. "I saw the article," she said finally. "You wrote it, didn't you?" His face didn't move, but she saw the truth anyway. "I know the silence," she continued. "I spent 10 years in corporate law before they reminded me whose name was on the building." "They laughed at me," he said, voice low, right to my face, like I was nothing. "You're not nothing," she said. "You're dangerous. Because you know what they look like when they think no one's watching." "I don't want to be dangerous," he said. "Then be undeniable." He looked at her, surprised by the sharpness in her voice. "I've reviewed some of your internship submissions," she added. "Impressive work, especially the patterns. You found in internal vendor payments." He blinked. "You saw that? I'm on the ethics board, Malik. You're not invisible here, unless you choose to be." For a moment, he didn't say anything. "I've been keeping track of payments that don't match," he said quietly. "False invoices, overcharges to dummy companies, some of them trace back to board members. Bribes? Looks like. Do you have access?" "Limited, but enough." Professor Hall leaned forward. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know yet." "Yes, you do." He exhaled. "I want them to be seen for who they are." "Good," she said. "But, do it right, not with rage, with receipts." Malik nodded slowly. That night he didn't go home. He went to the office. The security guard at the Helix Tech building recognized him and waved him in without question. His badge gave him access to Level 4, the data division. It wasn't full access, but it was close enough. He slipped into his cubicle and plugged in his external drive. His fingers moved fast, pulling reports, downloading invoices, cross-referencing payment trails that didn't belong. Every name, every transaction, every date, documented. He wasn't building a case. Out of anger, he was building a mirror so they could finally see themselves. By midnight, Malik had compiled over 70 pages of data, vendor payments routed to offshore accounts, multiple shell companies listed under vague names, Blue Crest Solutions, Monarch Holdings, Everline Services, none of which delivered actual goods. One invoice listed the delivery of 200 ergonomic chairs to a non-existent training facility. Another authorized a consulting fee for nearly $500,000, with no attached contract or report. He stared at the total. Millions, stolen behind the shield of polished suits and perfect smiles. He backed up the files in 3 locations. One to his encrypted cloud, one to a secure drive, and one to a folder he labeled "The Cost of Laughing Too Loud." The title came to him without effort. It felt right. When the sun started to rise, he shut off the screen and walked outside. The city looked different now, less daunting, more breakable. Later that morning, Malik met Professor Hall in a downtown cafe tucked between 2 law firms. She had a folder already waiting on the table. "I reached out to someone I trust," she said. "Black-owned investigative firm. Discreet, experienced. They've handled corporate fraud cases before. If you want this to matter, they'll help." He opened the folder. Inside were contact names, encrypted upload links, and instructions on how to legally file whistleblower protection. "They won't be able to bury this," he asked. "Not unless you let them. And what if it gets traced back? Then you stand with the truth, and we stand with you." He nodded. The next day, Evelyn found him outside the locker room, her expression tired but warm. "You're moving different," she said. Malik smiled faintly. "Just finally standing up straight." She looked at him long, as if searching for the boy she met months ago, the one who kept his head down and questions quiet. "That boy was gone. You ever hear about Tyrone?" she asked. "Who?" "Used to work here, young, smart, got fired 6 years ago after Mr. Benson accused him of stealing. No proof, just a missing bottle of wine." "What happened to him?" "He left the city. Never came back." Malik's jaw tensed. "He didn't deserve that." "No," Evelyn said, "and neither did you." That night, Malik uploaded the full report to the firm. They responded within hours. Thankful, impressed, careful. They confirmed the data. A case was being built. A timeline. A plan. Days later, he got a call from the firm's lead investigator. "This is the biggest leak we've had in years. You're not just exposing theft. You're exposing hypocrisy." The story was set to publish in 2 weeks. Malik sat in his apartment that evening, staring at the wall. He wasn't nervous. He was calm, anchored by something bigger than fear. This wasn't revenge. This was reckoning. The Helix Tech expose dropped on a Tuesday morning. The headline was bold and direct. "The Cost of Laughing Too Loud. A Financial Autopsy of Corporate Arrogance." Within hours, it dominated the local news cycle. Names were named, details were laid bare. A financial web of deception was untangled, led by someone the world had assumed was invisible. Malik watched the story unfold in real time. Colleagues at his internship whispered in the halls. Someone sent a group email pretending not to know who the whistleblower was. Anonymous messages rolled in, some grateful, some curious, a few angry. His phone buzzed constantly. Journalists, activists, even a national publication asking for a quote. He said no to all of them. Not yet. This wasn't about him being the face. It was about the truth finally having one. Back at the club, the mood had shifted. Mr. Benson didn't show up. Neither did half the board. Evelyn walked with purpose, her eyes scanning every face like a lighthouse scanning a dark sea. That evening, Malik walked into the kitchen to find Kenny waiting, holding a newspaper with the expose spread across 2 pages. "You did this?" Kenny asked, voice full of awe. Malik took the paper, looked at it for a moment, then handed it back. "We did," he said, "all of us who stayed quiet too long." The investigative firm reached out again. The story had led to 2 resignations and a criminal inquiry. Malik's report was now part of a federal ethics review. The Helix Tech Board had called for an emergency shareholder meeting. And then came the message that Malik hadn't expected. A student from another university wrote, "Your story gave me the courage to file a complaint I've been holding in for 2 years. I thought I was crazy. Now, I know I'm not alone." It hit Malik harder than the headline. Truth didn't just expose, it echoed. One evening, Professor Hall invited Malik to speak at a university panel on youth leadership. He didn't wear a suit. He wore what he always did: clean shirt, steady voice, clear eyes. He told the audience, "Sometimes the people in power forget that those who serve them are watching. Sometimes they need to be reminded that silence doesn't mean consent. It just means we're preparing." After the event, as he walked back to his apartment, Malik passed the country club and paused. Lights still glowed from the dining hall. He could picture the laughter, the polished glasses, the invisible weight. But tonight it didn't bother him. He smiled faintly, turned, and kept walking. There were bigger rooms waiting, and in them his name would not be whispered or mocked. It would be remembered. 2 days later, Malik received a formal letter from the investigative firm. The report had now been reviewed by legal experts, and several board members were being subpoenaed. They offered him anonymity, and he accepted for now. But attached to the letter was something else, an invitation to consult with their financial integrity team for future cases. Part-time, paid, flexible. They had read his internship reports. They had seen his work. They believed in it. He held the paper in his hands, stunned. It wasn't just recognition. It was trust. A kind of trust that came from standing up, not blending in. He called his Uncle Marcus that night. "I've been offered a position, a real one." There was a pause on the other end. Then Marcus said, "You fought back, not with fists, with truth. I couldn't be prouder." Malik sat on the edge of his bed. "I almost didn't do it. But you did. And now look." They talked for a long time, about the business, about life, about how far they'd come from that tiny garage filled with inventory and second-hand office chairs. Malik promised to visit soon. The next morning, Malik walked into class a little taller. Professor Hall saw him from across the room and gave a subtle nod. It said more than applause ever could. After class, she pulled him aside. "They offered you a seat at the table." "They did." "And you're going to take it?" "I already have." She smiled. "Then remember this. Use it to build a bigger table." Later that week, Malik returned to the club to collect the last of his things. He wasn't returning as staff. He wasn't serving drinks or clearing plates. He walked in as a guest, invited to attend a private dinner hosted by a nonprofit, honoring ethical leadership among youth. Evelyn met him at the door. "You look different," she said. "I feel different." She hugged him, tight. "I always knew," she whispered. "Just needed you to see it too." The dinner was small, elegant, and at one point, as the speaker introduced Malik's story, anonymized but familiar, he looked around the room and realized something. It wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about proving himself right. That night, he returned home and pulled out the badge from his wallet, the one he used to hide. He placed it in a shadow box frame beneath the words he had once written to himself. "I am not what they see. I am what I decide." And below it, he added a new line. "I decided to be seen." Weeks later, Malik sat on a park bench overlooking the skyline. The city stretched before him like a map of memory and movement. The wind was light, rustling the pages of his journal as he wrote without pressure, without pretending. He thought about the first day he walked into the country club, head down, shoulders tight, hoping to go unnoticed. And now here he was, not hiding, not shrinking, not waiting for permission to be more. What had started as a quiet humiliation had become a story of exposure, of courage, of building something meaningful from pain. He had learned that silence was never safety, It was a shadow, and Malik had chosen to step out of it. His phone buzzed with another email, a university panel, a scholarship offer, another door. He smiled. Then he wrote one last line in his journal before closing it. Dignity isn't something they give you. It's something you carry. And when you finally let it rise, no one can take it back. Then he stood, shoulders squared, and walked forward. The ballroom sparkled again. Crystal chandeliers, golden runners across every table, and a string quartet murmuring softly in the corner. Helix Tech's annual gala had returned, but something about the room felt off this time, like a performance rehearsed too many times. To remain convincing, it was elegance laced with tension. Malik moved through the crowd, dressed in the same black and white server uniform he once wore when they laughed at him. But this time, it wasn't shame that straightened his spine. It was control. He had chosen to be here. Every step was deliberate, every breath measured. He noticed how a few board members avoided eye contact. Some stiffened when he walked by. Others tried too hard to smile. They had seen the headlines, the exposé, the report that unraveled millions in fraud, buried beneath corporate jargon and polished veneers. But none of them knew the final stroke was coming tonight. Mr. Benson arrived fashionably late, surrounded by executives who still believed power could protect them. He was grinning, shaking hands, posing for photos, but his eyes never touched Malik, not once. Near the end of the night, the whispers started. A reporter spotted at the bar, a shareholder leaving early. Something was shifting just beneath the surface. Then came the moment. Mr. Benson, drink in hand, waved Malik over. "Handle this," he said, sliding a platinum company card onto the silver tray without so much as a glance. Malik nodded, fingers wrapping around the card like it was a key. He turned and walked briskly toward the back. Through the hallway, past the buzzing kitchen, into the quiet staff office where his laptop waited. He sat down, opened the secure portal provided by the investigative firm, and typed in the retainer agreement. The amount was exact. The routing number tied directly to the off-book slush fund, exposed by his own research. The signature automated. The documentation already built. He swiped the card. Transaction approved. In one moment, Helix Tech had funded its own takedown. Malik leaned back, breath slow, heart steady. It wasn't revenge, it was justice, clean, quiet, irreversible. An hour later, the gala buzzed louder than before, but not with joy. Phones began lighting up. Conversations paused mid-sentence. News alerts exploded across screens. Malik stood by the wall, a glass of water in hand, watching it unfold. Massive. Data leak ties Helix Tech to financial crimes, racial discrimination, screenshots of wire transfers, slurs embedded in internal memos, testimonies from whistleblowers who had stayed silent until someone gave them courage. By the time dessert was served, half the room had left. Evelyn found Malik near the back exit. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with something sharper, validation. "You what?" "Did it?" she said, her voice low. "We did," Malik replied. Across the ballroom, a swirl of executives gathered near the podium, trying to salvage control. The CEO of Public Relations made a rushed statement to the remaining crowd. No one listened. The truth was already free. It didn't need a microphone anymore. And then came the final confrontation. The kitchen doors burst open. Mr. Benson walked, in fast red in the face, eyes locked on Malik. Behind him trailed two executives, one with a phone pressed to his ear, panic rising in his voice. Benson stormed toward Malik, fists clenched. "You think this is a game?" he growled. Malik didn't flinch. "You think you've won something? You're finished." "No," Malik said. "I'm seen." Their eyes met fully for the first time. No tray between them, no jokes, no forced silence, just recognition. And, for the first time, Benson looked uncertain. "Everything you built," Benson snapped, "will collapse." "No," Malik replied. "Everything you built already has. You just haven't accepted it yet." Security appeared at the door, unsure what to do. Malik stepped back, calm as ever. "I don't need to shout," he said. "The truth speaks loud enough." The kitchen grew quiet. Then Benson turned and walked away, shouldering past the guards, like a man who had just seen the edge of his kingdom crumble. Malik stayed still, his heart calm, no tremor in his hands. Evelyn stepped beside him again, and for a few seconds they just stood in the silence together. Later that night, Malik walked out into the cool air, the night sky clean and wide above him. His phone buzzed, an email from the investigative firm. "Retainer activated, lawsuits pending, our team is safe. You did everything right." Another message. "The New York Times wants to speak with you. Only if you're ready." He stood there for a long moment, letting the wind hit his face. He had started this journey as a shadow. Tonight, he had become the storm. And as the glass doors behind him closed, Malik knew something deeply, undeniably true. There was no going back. He didn't go home right away. Instead, he walked the long way, past the old bookstore that was never open late, past the bench where he used to sit and wonder if anything he did would ever matter. The streets were quiet, but inside him, something buzzed with life. He reached his apartment, sat at his desk, and opened his laptop. The front page of the local paper had already changed. His story, anonymized but unmistakably his, was at the top. Below it were headlines he never imagined would exist in his lifetime. "Whistleblower exposes corporate racism and financial abuse. Board members resign amid Helix Tech scandal. The cost of laughing too loud. How one employee exposed a giant." And then a text from Professor Hall. "You've rewritten more than policy, Malik. You've rewritten possibility." He took a slow breath. The next morning, media trucks parked outside the Helix Tech headquarters. Employees left carrying boxes. HR directors held rushed exit interviews. The company's stock dropped 9 points before noon. Legal teams issued memorandums. Some employees celebrated. Others walked away, refusing to be part of the cleanup. Malik stayed quiet. He let the truth speak. At the university, students talked about him without knowing it was him. Flyers appeared for events on ethics and equity. The business school announced a new initiative to review partnerships and hiring practices. And in a quiet meeting with the university dean, Malik was offered something else: a full scholarship to finish his degree and a fellowship to continue his research on ethical finance. He had exposed corruption, but more importantly, he had proved that even in the darkest systems, a spark could spread. That weekend, he went back to the old church in East Lake, the one his uncle had taken him to as a boy. It was quiet inside, wooden pews, faded windows, the same smell of old hymnals and polished floorboards. He sat in the back. He closed his eyes. He wasn't praying. He was remembering his father's quiet exit, his mother's voice, Evelyn's steady support, Professor Hall's courage, Kenny's admiration, his own trembling hands holding that badge for the first time. Everything that led to this moment, and he knew now, none of it was wasted. He opened his journal, the one he had kept since the start of this journey. The pages were filled with scribbles, reflections, numbers, and quotes. At the very back, he wrote, "They tried to erase me with silence. I responded with clarity." Later that evening, Malik met Evelyn at a small diner near campus. She wore her Sunday best, even though it was just Saturday, and ordered coffee with extra cream. They didn't talk business. They talked life, you know, she said, stirring her cup slowly. "They still haven't taken down that portrait of Benson in the club hallway." "They will," Malik said. "And if they don't, then it'll hang over an empty room." She smiled at that. "You ever think it would go this far?" "No," he admitted, "but I knew I couldn't stay quiet." Evelyn reached across the table, gently touched his hand. "You didn't just speak up. You made space for others to be heard." "I had help," he said, "from people who reminded me who I was." Before leaving, she handed him a small envelope. Inside was a photo, Malik on his first day at the club, straight-backed and nervous. On the back she'd written, "You were already powerful, you just didn't know it yet." That night, Malik returned to his apartment and hung the photo beside the framed badge. A reminder of where he started and who he'd become. Days passed. Headlines faded. But Malik's name began to surface in new ways. Guest speaker, scholar, consultant. Not the waiter who was mocked. Not the intern in the shadows. But the man who helped dismantle an empire built on arrogance. One email changed everything. A national nonprofit wanted to recognize him at their annual summit on justice and leadership. He agreed. Not for applause, but for every voice that had been silenced before his. Standing at the podium, he didn't speak with fire. He spoke with certainty. I never wanted to take anyone down, he said. I just wanted to lift myself up and pull a few others with me. When he stepped off stage, a young black student approached him, eyes wide with hope. I thought maybe I couldn't do it, the student said. But now I think maybe I can. Malik smiled. Then you already have. That night, as he walked beneath the stars, Malik whispered something he hadn't dared say before. I'm proud of me. And this time, the silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full. A week later, Malik walked by the country club. He didn't stop this time. He didn't need to. It was just a building now, no longer a place that held power over him. Just bricks, wood, and chandeliers still trying to outshine the past. Inside, whispers remained. But now they carried weight. They carried change. Kenny had been promoted. Evelyn was offered a leadership role in training staff on racial sensitivity and ethics. The new manager, a woman who had read the report from cover to cover, had begun to clean house. Slowly, but surely, Malik didn't ask for any of it, but it came because truth has roots. And his had spread far beyond one room, one night, one swipe. He was invited to consult on corporate diversity audits, to lecture on financial transparency, to help design systems that could not only detect injustice, but prevent it. Still, he remembered the beginning, the tray, the napkin, the laugh. They no longer haunted him. They humbled him, because from those moments he had built something unshakable. That Sunday, Malik visited his mother. They sat on the porch, sunlight wrapping around them like a soft blanket. She didn't ask for details. She already knew. You. Good, baby? She asked, brushing lint off his shoulder. I am, he said. Better than I've ever been. You still working too much? Maybe. But it feels different now. She nodded. Long as you're not carrying the world alone. I'm not, he said. I've got help. Good people. And I'm learning to rest. She smiled. That's how we win. Not just by fighting, but by healing. They sat quietly for a while, watching the wind move through the trees. Malik thought about what came next, not as pressure but as possibility. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. He just needed to keep showing up, as himself, fully, boldly, and without apology. That night before bed, he opened his journal one last time for the chapter. He wrote, "This was never about taking power. It was about reclaiming worth." He closed the journal, placed it on the shelf, and turned off the light. Outside, the city breathed quietly, and inside, so did he. He turned toward the window, watching the early lights of the city flicker on. Somewhere out there, another young man like him was being told to be quiet, to stay small. But now there was a path, one paved by courage, not compliance, and Malik knew he hadn't just walked it. He had lit the way, for good, and that light would never go out. The morning Malik handed in his notice, the club was quiet. Not heavy, not awkward, just still. He folded the black and white uniform one last time, placed it in a brown paper bag, and left it on the counter with a short note. Thank you for the lessons. I'm taking them with me. Evelyn was already waiting outside the staff entrance. She didn't say anything right away. She just opened her arms, and he stepped into them. The hug was long, full, and final. They called me into the office. Yesterday, she said, pulling back. I'm the new manager. Malik smiled. Took them long enough. They also issued an apology. Public. Signed. Posted. Let's see if they mean it. I think they do, she said. Or at least now they know better. Malik nodded. That's a start. As he walked away from the building that had once made him feel invisible, he didn't look back. There was no need. What needed to be said had already been heard. 2 days later, a letter arrived, embossed, sealed, and official. It was from the National Social Equity Alliance. They offered Malik a full scholarship to finish his degree, along with a mentorship to work with their leadership development team. The letter said, "We believe your voice can shape future systems. Let us help you amplify it." Malik stared at it, barely breathing. Then he laughed, quiet and full of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. He shared the news with Professor Hall first. She replied in all caps, "Yes, this is just the beginning." And it was. The investigative firm that had helped him launch the exposé reached out with another offer. They had created a fund in his name, the Malik Thompson Fellowship, for minority interns interested in finance, data ethics, and corporate transparency. It wasn't just a gesture, it was a structure, a foundation. Kenny applied and got in. Weeks passed. The buzz around the scandal faded, but the impact didn't. Policies changed. Leaders stepped down, community leaders took notice. The quiet ones, those who had watched from the sidelines, began to ask harder questions. Malik didn't speak often, but when he did, people leaned in. He visited the club once more, only to walk past it. His steps didn't slow, his breath didn't hitch. He was different now, not because the world had changed, but because he had. He now worked at a startup incubator, a place built from bold ideas and even bolder dreams. The walls weren't glass and gold like Helix Tech's boardrooms, but they held something stronger. Intention, hope, purpose. His desk was simple, a small potted plant, a coffee mug with faded lettering, and a framed quote on the wall behind him, handwritten on lined paper in his mother's slanted script. "They can ignore your voice, but they can't erase your worth." He looked at it often, especially on hard days. His job was to review funding. Proposals from minority entrepreneurs, many of whom had ideas born from struggle. A food delivery app built by single moms. A financial literacy program started by former inmates. A clothing line by kids who couldn't afford their own product but dared to dream anyway. He saw in them pieces of himself. Determined, underestimated, relentless. When one of them asked during a coaching session, "What made you keep going when you weren't sure anyone was listening?" Malik paused before answering. "I didn't keep going because I was sure. I kept going because I couldn't stay where I was." The room went quiet after that. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast gold across the office floor, Malik sat back in his chair, tired but fulfilled. He checked his calendar. Another speaking request, this time from a high school where suspension rates for black boys were 3 times the city average. He accepted. He wasn't just telling his story anymore. He was helping others right there. The world hadn't become perfect, but it had become possible. And Malik had become more than a headline, more than a whistleblower, more than a symbol. He had become someone who proved that quiet doesn't mean weak. That power doesn't always look like volume. Sometimes it looks like dignity, like a swipe, like a voice raised only when necessary, and still heard by all. He never shouted, he never cursed, he never raised his voice. But everyone heard him. Later that week, Malik received a handwritten letter. No return address. Just 4 lines. "I was there that night. I laughed too. I've carried it since. Thank you for helping me see myself." He folded the note and placed it in his journal. Not for forgiveness, but as proof that transformation was contagious, even for those slowest to face it. A few days later, Malik visited his uncle's small warehouse, the place where his journey into numbers began. Marcus had turned a dusty back room into a mentorship space for local youth. "If you're not too busy," he told Malik, "we could use a guest speaker." Malik smiled. "I'll bring slides." They laughed, the way only family laughs, full and honest and without burden. Before leaving, Marcus pulled out a framed article. The exposé that had started it all. He handed it to Malik. I know you don't need reminders, Marcus said. But sometimes it's good to remember how far a whisper can carry. That night, Malik stood in front of his apartment window, watching the city lights shimmer in quiet rhythm. He thought of the journey, the laughter, the silence, the betrayal, the resistance, the power, the peace. He thought of who he was the first time he put on that uniform, and who he had become when he finally took it off. He wasn't looking for applause. He was living for alignment. And as he turned off the light, he whispered to the dark, "They heard me." And this time, the silence didn't just listen. It agreed. Because when a man speaks with truth and grace, even those who once ignored him are forced to listen.